ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. In the last 24 hours of war, the Iraqis say that one of the Allied prisoners of war has been killed during an Allied bombing raid on a government building in Baghdad. The oil slick in the Persian Gulf is spreading out and still moving south towards Saudi Arabia. And more Iraqi aircraft have left the battle altogether and taken off for Iran, which is the subject with which we begin. First at the Pentagon, ABC's Bob Zelnick.
According to the Pentagon, about a dozen Iraqi aircraft fled to Iran during the past 24 hours. Overall, Iraq has sent at least 75 top-of-the-line combat aircraft to Iran, including about 40 F-1 Mirage jets and 15 MiG-29s. Publicly, the military says there is no cause for concern.
They have fled the battlefield. They don't have their maintenance facilities with them. Therefore, it is more difficult for them to participate in the battle. So from my perspective, yes, I see it as a net plus for the coalition.
But Pentagon officials privately expressed concern about the 30 transport planes also sent to Iran, since these could well have carried weapons and spare parts for later use by the fighters. Military officials say Iran's airfields are now being closely monitored by satellite and AWACS radar planes to make sure the Iraqi planes do not move any closer to U.S. ground or naval forces than they are now.
They're further away now from American forces than they would be back at their home airfield in Iraq. So, you know, I think that their fleeing to Iran is more a sign of weakness than a sign of some devious plot.
Analysts here say Saddam Hussein may still plan to use these planes in the current war. They note that in the early stages of his war against Iran, he sent combat aircraft to bases in Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, only to bring them back later. Because U.S. combat priorities are mainly in the Kuwait theater to the south, no special effort has been made to intercept the fleeing jets. But officials say if they can be caught while still over Iraqi territory, U.S. aircraft will try to shoot them down. Bob Zelnick, ABC News at the Pentagon.
The flight of Iraqi aircraft to Iran is turning out to be one of the more intriguing mysteries of the war so far. A short while ago, we talked to ABC's Pierre Salinger and John McWethy. Pierre Salinger in London, do your sources tell you there was a deal between Iran and Iraq even before the war began?
That's correct, Peter. Our sources tell us that a deal was made, and one particular deal was made 3 days before the war broke out. Yitzhak Ibrahim, the deputy prime minister of Iraq, went to Iran and made a deal with the Iranians to provide safe havens for Iraqi aircraft. In return, the Iranians agreed that they would allow those aircraft to leave Iran and return to Iraq if they were needed to participate in the war. We understand that after that agreement was made, a certain number of planes went from Iraq to Iran before the war started.
Let me stop you there. Now, what was the deal? What were the Iranians going to get in return, and who were the Iranians the Iraqis dealt with?
We don't have a specific name of who Yitzhak Ibrahim met with, but we know that the deal was made because there was a earlier deal made between Iraq and Iran before the August 2nd invasion of Kuwait, a wide deal which was meant to bring closer relations between Iran and Iraq.
Pierre, does that mean that Iran had decided before the war it might come into the war on Iraq's side?
I don't believe that they intended to come into the war on the Iraqi side, but I believe that they wanted to give as much support as they could, as quietly as they could, without letting the rest of the world know about it.
Now, does that deal still hold, or has it fallen apart?
That deal does not hold now. As I understand, about 5 days into the war, the Iranians decided that Iraq was going to lose the war, and then decided that they would keep these planes and not allow them to go out.
So, as of now, your sources tell you that those Iraqi aircraft have gone to Iran and will remain in Iran.
That is correct. They will remain in Iran unless, and this the sources say, unless Israel involves itself in the war, or there are flight attacks on the very, very holy mosques in Iraq, which are also very revered in Iran.
Okay, Pierre Salinger in London. Let us turn now to our national security correspondent, John McWethy, who is standing by in Washington. John, do U.S. sources agree that there was a pre-war deal between Iraq and Iran?
American officials say they cannot rule it out, Peter, but they say they do not know for sure. There is some circumstantial evidence that there was, in fact, a deal between Iran and Iraq to allow Iraqi transport aircraft and commercial aircraft to get out of the war zone. There is also some evidence which indicates that Iran was both surprised and very unhappy when the first of the warplanes started coming across. They, in fact, turned the first few of them away.
Now, Iran, as we all know, is a fairly fractured place politically. Does the U.S. know who the deal was made with in Iran?
They don't know who the deal is made with. In fact, they don't really know that there was a deal. But what they are saying now is that they tend to believe what they are hearing from Iran, because Iran is speaking quite unusually with just one voice in both the public forums and in private communication. In just the last 24 hours, Iran is saying those aircraft are not going to leave. And I might just add, Peter, that U.S. officials are speculating that Iraq may never get those aircraft back. As you know, Iran has long sought a first-class Air Force, and just by chance, one has just arrived on their doorstep for free.
And the $64,000 question for Americans, John, they trust the Iranians at the moment?
Well, not necessarily trust them, but they have very little choice but to listen.
John McCarthy and Pierre Salinger. Here's one of the suggested reasons, or another suggested reason, why the Iraqi Air Force may be fleeing the scene of battle. Many of them have been hiding in deeply fortified bunkers. At the Pentagon today and on Israeli television, there is the suggestion that Allied planes have hit many of them. The Israelis say actually a third. In a moment, a continuation of the air war going after well-dug-in Iraqi targets in Kuwait. On the American agenda tonight, the state of some domestic issues awaiting presidential attention, and school children and their buddies in the Marines.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by Scope.
Iraqi radio said today that Allied airman, it did not give either a name or a nationality, who had been killed in the Allied bombing of Baghdad, was being held hostage at the Ministry of Industry, and he died, say the Iraqis, during an air raid last night. The Pentagon says it has no information. This is about as much as we know of the air war today. 1,300 combat missions, one Iraqi plane shot down, no U.S. losses, and with Iraq's Air Force virtually out of the picture, one American intelligence officer said it looks as if the poor Army guys have been left on their own. At the Pentagon briefings today, there was no word about how well the attacks on the Republican Guard are going in occupied Kuwait or southern Iraq, but there was a hint from some of the pilots who are doing the bombing. Here's ABC's Jim Hickey.
After nearly 2 weeks of war, U.S. fighter pilots have developed a healthy respect for Iraq's air defenses. These Marine pilots say the number of surface-to-air missiles fired at them has dropped off. Many SAM sites have been destroyed, and what is fired is ineffective. Anti-aircraft artillery, AAA, however, is still a big threat.
We had a lot of AAA this morning, which you can see it goes off, looks like popcorn going off below you.
Marine FA-18 pilots are still concentrating their attacks on Saddam Hussein's elite Republican guards in Kuwait. They say the guards are being hurt, but admit they don't.
Well, that's a puzzlement. That was Jim Hickey's report coming in from Saudi Arabia. From time to time, we have a technical difficulty there. But there's nothing untoward in many of the cases. We would remind you, by the way, that all of the news from the Middle East is subject to censorship. We have some television pictures from Iraq today to show what the Iraqi government says is destruction caused by Allied bombing. Iraq says the bombs hit residential neighborhoods in the city of Basra, as well as in the cities of Al-Najaf and Kufa, considered sacred to Shiite Muslims. In the view of some Middle East analysts, those bombings in the holy cities, if they did take place, would be effective in drawing the Iranians closer to Iraq, because both countries have large Shiite Muslim populations. Refugees reaching Jordan from Baghdad say the road from from Iraq up to Jordan is under attack now almost every day, and that Allied bombing along that road is killing civilians. Pentagon officials say that the road is also used by the Iraqi military to move, among other things, mobile Scud missile launchers. Pentagon says again today that civilians, when they are killed by accident. We'll try now to rejoin Jim Hickey, or at least join him at the beginning, perhaps, for some sense of what's going on in the whole report. He's talking to pilots who've been out bombing Iraqi positions in occupied Kuwait and in southern Iraq.
After nearly 2 weeks of war, U.S. fighter pilots have developed a healthy respect for Iraq's air defenses. These Marine pilots say the number of surface-to-air missiles fired at them has dropped off. Many SAM sites have been destroyed, and what is fired is ineffective. Anti-aircraft artillery, AAA, however, is still a big threat.
We had a lot of AAA this morning, which you can see it goes off, looks like popcorn going off below you.
Marine FA-18 pilots are still concentrating their attacks on Saddam Hussein's elite Republican guards in Kuwait. They say the guards are being hurt, but admit they don't know how badly. Damage assessment is difficult. The pilots say they are having problems finding some of the targets, like tanks, because they are so well dug in.
You know, you can hide a tank, you throw a bunch of camouflage netting over it and throw some sand on top of it, and it's not doing them any good, but we can't find them for the time being either.
Ground crews scrambled to launch more FA-18s as the Marine pilots intensified their assault on Iraqi troops, which are proving resourceful.
They've gotten very good at repairing everything that gets damaged. You know, their engineers, I'm sure, are very good.
After so many days of continuous bombing runs, fatigue among pilots and ground crews is becoming a factor. Not enough to be a major problem yet, commanders say, but enough to cause concern.
Squadron leaders are rotating schedules so that pilots and crews get a full day off to think about things other than flying. Still, the priority is flying and taking out anything Iraq might use to threaten U.S. ground forces, like artillery batteries.
Our intent is not to go up there to dismay anybody. Our intent is to go up there and kill them.
The pilots are confident they will do just that when the well-dug-in Iraqi troops finally move out. This is Jim Hickey with the 3rd Marine Air Wing in the Persian Gulf.